Good evening, guys. This is Ken at Tortoise Capital with the nightly strategy podcast for Friday, May 8th, 2020. We're going to follow a slightly different pattern today. Since it's Friday, I'm going to do the speed run and the report review and the weekend report all tomorrow. Today, I had the good fortune of starting the day off with an excellent email exchange with Van Miller. The trades were all working without much work on my part. So I had a chance to go through some books and stuff while I was just kind of monitoring positions. And then I slowly got ready for 4 master's thesis defenses today. I had 4 officers whose research I'm supervising defending their theses today for their masters in military arts and science. An Air Force officer who's re-engineering our strategic lift capability to modernize it and leverage civilian airframes. 2 Army officers who are investigating physical fitness and emotional intelligence, respectively, and then a absolutely brilliant Jamaican Defense Forces officer who's on their strategic planning team, has the direct ear of the Minister of Defense, and we were working through his adaptation of modern military theory, and he's a profound thinker, and so we just had about 90 minutes of just really good brain work today. It was a really satisfying day at work. So the afternoon trades went pretty well, and I've got a number of trade frames that I want to go through. And so after we go through the market closure and I'm going to do the weekly lessons learned today, some lessons that just really jumped out at me from my learning journal. So I want to just walk through those. And then I've got about 8 or 10 individual trade frames. And so what I'm going to do on that is I don't have them marked up, but what I'm going to do is walk through them bar by bar with you and just kind of call out what I'm seeing. And I'm going to invite you to make your decisions on a trade log where you could record where you're going to enter and do some of that stuff, and then sort of evaluate your judgment against the narration. So this is sort of like the bridge to you acquiring the internal narrative skills, right? So I'll call out what I'm seeing. What you've heard me do in the past is I've called out what I've seen and then marked up my decision. So today what we're going to try is I'm going to call out what I see, but then you make the decisions. And then that's sort of the bridge to you call out what you see and you make the decisions. In educational theory, we would call this the gradual release of responsibility technique. So this is a technique. I'm going to try this. If we like this and if you like it, we may do this once a week or something like that, like on a Friday, and then have a set of them for you to work through over the weekend. So we're going to give that a try. So it's all about the narrative inquiry and the use of language. So Eugene and I have been talking about the power of language, the importance of language, and the role that icons and totems and archetypes have when it comes to making sense. There's a limit to those things, and if you take them beyond the region of fit, they can, shape or constrain you in certain ways, which is kind of the work Van does, I believe, with the use of belief analysis and changing at the root level, the habits of mind that we use that are keyed into words. So I think his work in neuro-linguistic programming is kind of aimed a lot at that level. So the whole notion of the power of narratives and words as leverage for action, but also as constraints on action, has been on my mind. Well, one of my mentors is a guy named David Boji, and we're going to see him. If he's not the leading authority in the world on narrative inquiry, he's one of the top three. He's kind of really defined major parts of that whole field about how the power of narratives and stories shape our individual and group views of the world and the way we understand things. And so, because of this email exchange with Van Miller, I had a chance to reconnect with him, and I'll talk about that here in a second. So this is an interesting, what a long, strange trip it's been. And you already know, for me, the power of words in an auditory learning brain like mine. It's when you are auditory and global top down, stories and words and phrases take on a magical quality. I had Van is a architect, career architect, professional, and we were talking about some things, and I had mentioned this phrase here in the yellow. Van, I said, you know at a deep level what I mean about design thinking, craft knowledge as an architect. And interestingly, that's where the design thinking movement back in the 1970s really originated, and it has emerged into a whole line of thinking about what to do with wicked problems, and has sort of been called the design thinking movement. And Horst and Riddle were the original scholars. One was an architect, I believe, and one was an urban planner. And out of that kind of craft artistic knowledge comes a larger philosophical stance about how to address conditions of uncertainty and complexity. And it's been 40 years of very interesting work in the cognitive sciences and design thinking. It has penetrated the Army's planning processes and become a formal part of our problem-solving repertoire, and I use it on a regular basis. So there's deep roots there, and so I was exchanging some ideas with Van, who said, hey, well, Ken, you remind me of a 77 book, A Pattern Language by the legendary Christopher Alexander, who was looking at how to examine the tools and techniques and constructs and artifacts of language, but also of design, to unlock this black box of intuitive artistry into something more like a semi-structured craft knowledge that involved both science and art and management and informed practice, as well as theoretical beauty. That's my understanding of his work. And then his coined term, a pattern language, is expressed in his 77 book, A Pattern Language. Well, I take that as a direct challenge. So off I go to Amazon in a moment to go see how inexpensively I can buy that book. So this is a definition of pattern language, and it has almost some mystical qualities to it. An attempt to express deeper wisdom that brings aliveness within a particular field of human endeavor through a set of interconnected patterns. And so at its fundamental level, genuine art connects the artifacts of the craftsman with some kind of deeper themes that evoke a spiritual response. It gets to our emotional and feeling center and transcends the craft into the world of meaning. And then the method or the media becomes less important than the connection of two spirits over time and space. The idea of aliveness being that the unnamed, a sense of wholeness, spirit, and grace. So that's sort of the Asian Tao concept. While it varies in form, it does also have some qualities of precision and empirical verifiability. I love this quote. Some advocates of this design approach claim that ordinary people can use it to successfully solve very large, complex design problems. So it's almost like the audacity of ordinary people to claim that they think they can solve problems in the world. Yeah, that's what I aspire to be, is that kind of ordinary person. And then using these tools that are knowable, teachable, and craft knowledge. Well, that launched me. So I said, my stream of consciousness was, yeah, that really resonates strongly with the idea of narrative and the performance arts, where we're communicating through these tropes and these archetypes. And these artists' tools on their palette has a strong connection to the patterns and forms of carpenters and craftsmen and masons. It's all of a type, this straddling art, science, and methodology. And in that modality, qualities like elegance and the Japanese, design, less design is more, like wabi sabi is the concept, and the Danish kind of style, a very laconic style. We're mindful not to confuse the templates that are used in the construction and the framing with the final sense of the finished product. They're simple means to an end, but not simplistic. Well, even though they're simple and they're the means, not the end, I also take pleasure in those means, looking for artistry, elegance, and a certain parsimonious design sensibility, that I find the artfulness in the making and in the tools. And so I'm connecting Van with a friend of mine, GS, who's an engineer, trader, musician, a mystic, an original thinker. And so let's see what happens there. And then I pointed him to Dr. David Boji, the preeminent scholar practitioner in the world of narrative inquiry, Vietnam veteran, my mentor in my doctoral journey, where his discussions of narrative inquiry as a stance, as a research method, but also a philosophical approach to the world, really got into my hardware and motherboard and caused me to rewire everything. He's got a book on 8 different ways to restory a narrative, how to take it apart and reassemble it in 8 different structured ways. It's a book about 150 pages long, and I'm still reading it 10 years later, about a paragraph at a time, and I hope to finish it someday. But it's so profound that I can only get about a phrase, a sentence, or a paragraph into it at a time before it just blows me away, and I got to think about it for a month. He is a supporter of the homeless, the mentally and emotionally challenged, the broken people living in the shadows, and he lives that through his action research process of living, making a difference in the world, and does amazing work down there in New Mexico. I consider him a enlightened one, a bodhisattva, and a change agent. He's also the freest thinker I've ever met, and I claim him as a mentor, but just from watching him at a distance and trying to absorb what he does, and the exchanges we've had in person and through emails over the last 15 years have just been phenomenal. As a way to ground himself in the world of practice, he decided at age 60-ish to take up blacksmithing and to get connected back to the world, because he was concerned about not being meaningful and grounded, and what could be more grounded than blacksmithing and moving metal and making things that endure. So we had an exchange on that today, and so I mentioned to Van that the pattern language concept connects strongly to his view of tools and the transcendent nature of language, which I believe is our only hope for freedom in the world and of the world. And just reiterate my goal to become that ordinary person who takes on the challenge of trying to solve complex problems with design thinking. And I'm making that a provisional claim. I'm trying to improve our response to those design problems, because as we know from the wicked problems of Horst and Riddle, wicked problems don't have an end state or a stopping point or a solution. They have management, appreciation, and shaping, and mutual co-creation and evolution. They don't ever change. They're much like that dragon in the river that just keeps going, sort of timeless and eternal, part of the human condition. Well, I forwarded this note of exchange between Van and I, and BCC'd it to David Bogie just to let him know and remind him in what high esteem I hold him. And he sent me a note back that said, hey, they're convening a series of Zoom webinars where some global thinkers in narrative inquiry are going to get around and talk about it and how it can be used to help shape the world in positive humanistic ways, and would I like to attend. And so I was very honored, said yeah, and so we exchanged some things, and I put some words together about that in thanks, and he said, hey, can I quote you on that? And I said, sure. And I said a few other things. He said, you're a kung fu master of storytelling. So he, which just made me blush, but he kind of brings that out of me. He has made me a fearless narrator of whatever feels like it needs to be said in my head. I've learned to trust that voice and just let it go and see what happens and just live with it, the consequences, and try to be a good person on the inside, and whatever comes out is connected hopefully to that, letting the dragon loose, as you might imagine. So this reconnection with him, can be found in the exchange between Van and Miller and I, and the email. So I'm really grateful for your reply. And so right after this and talking with Bogie, I went ahead to go look at the that book by Christopher Johnson. And so as I logged in to Amazon, all this is connected to trading at some point. Hang in there, guys. So I went there and looked, and I said, Amazon knows me pretty well. And so here's the notation of the, it says, here's some books you may like. And everything that is checked in green are books that I have and have read and loved. Duran's Quality Handbook. He's the original statistical process control guy, quality control master back in the teens and 20s and 30s, was my dad's mentor. And my dad used to play golf with Joe Duran. And that kind of got me launched on this entire approach to a statistical based approach to managing trading. In my logistics background, the box and how the shipping container made the world smaller. This is an amazing story about a solution that some guy who was shipping carpet in New England came up with, this 20-foot container, and it got viral, and through no plan, but through emergent qualities, completely revolutionized all of the global supply chains. And this tells that story. And it, in less than a decade, completely revolutionized the world. Implementing Six Sigma is an outstanding book on how to actually do it, to do lean thinking with statistics and organization. The 7 Military Classics is fantastic. Sawyer's treatment of it is brilliant. That's where the 36 strategies build out the Sun Tzu's Art of War at the next layer, which was sort of the inspiration for my document, the 37 Tortoise strategies, which is now 43. The Imagineers of War is about the design thinkers in defense and research agency, DARPA, who invented the internet in response to how to solve the problem of robust communications and connecting researchers from various universities, and thus the internet. They changed the world. Crucial Conversations, Tools for Talking When Stakes Are High is the only one I don't have. It's a second edition, therefore it is worth reading. because if it was that good and enough people sent feedback, then that's worth reading. And so since that's about language and engagement, and it's cheap, so I bought that. Then of all these other ones that were that second order of connection, I went and bought the Pattern Language, the Poetics of Space, which is a discussion of visual design and artistry in a practical way, the design of everyday things. I had that one and gave it away and reminded myself I needed to buy it. I also have this one, the Tao of Capital. So everything on there is something that I want to read. Um, and so Amazon actually knows me pretty well. But this is what happens when you are a top-down auditory person and the trail that you get on. And so in my mailbox today, what arrived from my last round of purchasing was process-based a handbook of clinical competencies based on science for cognitive behavioral therapy. My daughter's studying psychology, is going to be a psychiatrist, and these guys, Hayes and Hoffman, are very well regarded. And a handbook is the way that a practitioner and an engineer go about into the application. So I think there's some good things in there that are going to be connected to my study of positive psychology as I try to map those to the psychological toolkit that we have to build up our emotional bank account to deal with the stresses and the cognitive emotional costs of trading. That's a real thing. And so I'm interested in both of those, and I trust science and I trust handbooks and engineers. That was followed shortly thereafter by Musashi's Dokudo, which is another writing that extends his work from the Book of Five Rings, back from the 1600s. And then a commentary, The American Ronin, The Way of Walking Alone, a commentary on the Dokudo of Miyamoto Musashi. So that was sort of my afternoon, what I was doing while I was just watching the pot cooking. Sometimes you just got to let the stew cook, and that's they were all working today. All the things that we set up and framed yesterday out of the critical state all started working today. And so when they're working, let them cook. And so that's where that journey took me today.